So, picture this. In Denmark, me and my family were walking around and having lunch in this village market, but then it started raining. Typical Danish weather. Whatever concurrent plans we had got canned, and we went back to my aunt's house and I played Uncharted with my cousin instead. But not before buying this bag of construction Lego for 50 kroner, which is equivalent to £5 in the UK. Question is, did I get my money's worth? Let's begin by examining the contents. The first thing inside the bag is a bunch of instructions for numerous construction sets, featuring the likes of the infamous Ben 10 sets, some Star Wars buildable figures, and a few Hero Factory sets. Despite the featured instructions, the guy at the counter warned me that not all the pieces to build them are in the bag, but regardless, these instructions are appreciated. Next up is a hefty metallic red Levi's tin, which contains some of the more smaller and easier to lose pieces in the bulk lot, mixed in with some other pieces that will bring out some details, as well as whatever this is. Okay, I can't contain my excitement anymore. What other pieces are in the lot? Won't you look at that? There is another instruction manual of Jala and Ica from Bioncle. This wouldn't be the first time I've had a 2006 Toa set, as I own Luparu and Harley, but I'm excited at the prospect of building Jala, provided all the pieces are there. Generally speaking, there are many great pieces on display which I have never owned before, even the occasional anomalies that slipped through the cracks. How the hand of Jay's Electromech from Ninjago ended up here is really anyone's guess. The next logical step for me is to rebuild the figures I have a mild interest in. There are some sets I chose not to rebuild because I already owned them, like Voltex or Spider Monkey, the latter of which I decked out with some cannons I made with some spare pieces 3 years ago. I am such a good parent. And look, I love Star Wars as much as the next guy, Yellow Proof is epic, but I've never been super interested in the buildable figures, so I'm skipping them out. But if you think any of these sets are worth rebuilding though, do let me know in the comments below, and I might give them a chance. Anyway, with the criteria set, I will be rebuilding Swampfire, Jetray, and Jala. Let's get cracking. Quick disclaimer, any opinions I make on the sets in this video are just my personal silly opinions. And if you don't like a figure I like and vice versa, that's perfectly okay. Let's start with Swampfire, as he's quite a simple figure to build. Yeah, the Ben 10 figures aren't known for being very complex, so I found most of his pieces with little difficulty, even with some curious stumbles in the way. Bladdock's foot. It was a little difficult trying to find Swampfire's torso amidst all the pieces, but that was really the only major hitch in trying to rebuild this guy. And like the rest of the Ben 10 theme, something must have been severely lost in translation when adapting the cartoonish look of the aliens to the construction format. Swampfire is hit very hard with this, and he looks very bland and uncharacteristic. He's not even very accurate to the original design either. Swampfire's animation model was a bit of a skinny Malinky with a sharp and angular design oozing with swampy detail, while successfully marrying the olive green and red with a tertiary black color scheme. But thanks to the figure predominantly using bricks in the inaccurate mint green, Swampfire just looks very bland and boring. Articulation is pretty great, even if I had to swap around said arm pieces so that he'd had more ranges of motion. But being a Lego Construction set released in 2010, that was the bare minimum. If there is a major point of interest for the figure, it's that, although inaccurate to the source material, the mint green pieces can potentially work well for mock building, considering that particular color isn't seen all too often in construction. Overall, as a buildable figure, Swampfire does the job, but is very boring overall, and it was more fun finding pieces that weren't Lego than building and posing Swampfire. Let's put into... Whoa. That is not Lego. Get that out of here. We might as well continue this Ben 10 streak with Jetray. And rebuilding Jetray was pretty much the same experience as Swampfire, even down to finding another piece from Lego Knights Kingdom Vladek. The singular point of interest in the building experience was definitely the exclusive rubber wings, as they connect to 3 axle pins, one on the back and 2 others on the back of his arms. Plus, I found it funny that the previous owners left their initials on the wings like if it's their prized possession in this bulk lot. And this one singular never used again piece improves the experience of handling this figure. Moving the arms will either bend the wings inwards or outwards, and it's really fun to do over and over again. This piece really lends itself well in the figure's posability to make it even more dynamic, and as a result, I had way more fun putting Jetray into super expressive poses. In spite of how I was more pleasantly surprised with Jetray in comparison to Swampfire, it is still, by and large, a LEGO Ben 10 set. Jetray still poorly recaptures the source material, and his face sculpt looks more like my dad pulling an exaggerated angry face than it does Jetray, and posability is on the same level as Swampfire, albeit now more restricted because of the exclusive rubber wing piece. Speaking of, all the figure's best qualities rests on the back of that one singular piece, quite literally and metaphorically. Without it, he is just as bland as Swampfire. Now for the figure I was the most excited to rebuild with the instructions, Jala the Nika. Of all the figures I was rebuilding, Jala is the most complex, and this was when I began anticipating the thought I wouldn't be able to find all the necessary pieces. So I scrounged around for some spares that could substitute well into the set if worse comes to worse. The fact that the faceplate had a coffee stain on it didn't help my concerns either. Is this Vladik's curse? Despite this, rebuilding Jala was still a fun experience. Having owned 2 other Nika sets before meant that I managed to rebuild a majority of the set without the instructions, with my only major stumble being that I used the wrong neck piece and the first one was the correct length the entire time. To my absolute shock, I managed to rebuild Jala 100% complete, with the only exceptions being the connecting piece for the launcher being the wrong color, and of course, he only came with 1 Zamor sphere instead of 4, but they are commonly lost accessories for any old construction set anyway. Jala looks stunning with a simple but effective burgundy red and gold color scheme, with a transparent orange adding a nice highlight to draw your attention to the figure. Articulation, per the course for the Nika sets, is incredible, and Jala's unique sword piece is absolutely iconic and fun to accentuate posing with, even without the lighter feature. Though we all know what the Captain of the Guard's true weapon is. I do find him a bit inferior to the other Nika sets I own. He doesn't have the same distinct design and presence of Nuparu. He's not here, I didn't have space for him in my luggage, so you'll have to take my word for it. And he lacks the snazzy dual molded pieces that Harley wears so proudly. Jala is my least favorite Nika I have so far, but that isn't saying a lot as I still adore the figure and all things considered, he is an amazing find in this haul. I otherwise would have had to pay £9 for a figure at minimum for the same experience, so rebuilding him from a £5 bulk lot along with thousands of other pieces is a massive steal. So what about the aforementioned other pieces? Well, the more and more I looked, the more I discovered there were specific pieces for 2 additional Bioncle sets, Toa Norvik and Varki Bordark. However, neither set came with their respective instructions, so I decided to take initiative and attempt to rebuild these sets, along with using the LEGO websites to find the specific instructions I needed. I was hyped to rebuild Norvik, especially since his mask piece and shield were lying around the hole, but the more and more I tried finding pieces, the more I noticed there were more pieces to complete Iruni, who is a figure I already owned, so I sadly had to give up with Norvik. Hey, this means there are more pieces for mock building later. Bordark thankfully was way more of a success, as 95% of his pieces were in the bulk lot. There was only 1 beige pin in the entire bag which I used in the lower torso construction, so I ended up utilizing another blue pin instead. The set's trademark staffs of royalty were also nowhere to be seen, so I used up 2 of these swords as substitutes. And yeah, it's a Varki alright. It's not a new experience for me as I bought a Zacked on a day trip to Brighton a year ago. However, Bordark can get into more dynamic poses thanks to me using that serendipitous blue pin, Either dark blue mixed with a transparent orange color is a very lush color scheme that breaks up the otherwise abundant grey. Broad dark is probably the antithesis of Jalo in this video, as while I think he is just a substandard, albeit enjoyable figure and nothing groundbreaking beyond that, of the two Varkies I have, he is probably my favourite so far, even if it's only because of a marginal preference in colour scheme. But I can't just end this section there. I needed one last hurrah before I started building Mocs from a bulk lot, and since I found so many pieces for Lord Vladik, I thought I'd try my hand in rebuilding him with the pieces I can find. It didn't go so well. Who am I looking at? Lord Vladik or Lord Farquaad? At least the gear function still works perfectly. Now that I had my fill of rebuilding figures, it's time for real fun to begin, making my own personal creations out of the remaining pieces in the bulk lot. Now for some Mocs, let's get wild and ooh, okay, I've already found a good piece. And oh no, already it's all coming together. For my first creation, I opted to go with something considerably simpler. So I started by mixing some pieces from my attempt at building Toa Norik, along with some CCBS pieces from a Star Wars buildable figure line. But that wasn't enough. It needed more pizzazz, so I played around with some pieces, trying to utilize them in a unique way to create a broadsword weapon, while making sure the pieces used added to a figure's look rather than take away. And using a gunmetal grey torso piece really helped the colour scheme flow a bit better. The more and more I built a weapon, the more it reminded me of the character Vanguard from a 1998 PlayStation fighting game called Cardinal Sin. This further gave me an inspiration to create a separate mace arm, as well as characterize him as sort of a mysterious Black Knight character. The Star Wars buildable figures line has plenty of capes I believe the Moc wouldn't look as cool or complete without. So, naturally, I tried every single one before making a decision. Armored and sharpened for combat, meet Vanguard. Yeah, I also named him after that same Cardinal Sin character. I am so original. By no means do I think Vanguard is the best Moc I ever created, and his cape is sort of what makes me love this Moc in the first place, as he'd be a bit hollow and bare without it, but I still like the black and silver color scheme, which delivers an imposing presence, and I love how the weapons came out. Granted, I had to give his right arm Captain Phasma's chest piece to better unify his mace so that it doesn't stick out awkwardly with the rest of the build, but I could still get him into some dynamic poses thanks to the usage of some friction adders in the arms. My main issue with this Moc is that the legs have heavily restricted knee articulation because of the pieces I used, but for my first original creation from a bulk lot, I really like it. He's simple but effective, much like the character he was inspired by. My next custom, however, wasn't as straightforward of a process. Initially, I began the idea of making a beast or creature rather than a warrior like I usually do with my Mocs, using the Ben 10 torso pieces as a good starting point, without they have 2 additional ball joints molded into the chest, though this was more used with the Spider Monkey set and the combo builds, or I say combinations, but rather abominations. I pinned 2 Star Wars torso pieces together while attaching basic Bioncle connections for the arms and legs. I came up with some weird pincer hands, which uses a silver variant of the Beast Wars claw pieces from a Hero Factory Invasion from Below line, along with the foot armor pieces introduced with Pahatu Nuva. I continued this scorpion-like design by adding a cannon tail that can double as a stinger, but that was when the design just simply began not working for me anymore, as due to the torso armor clashing with the posability of the tail, I felt the figure would be more compromised than necessary, so I took a tea break to refresh myself. When returning to the build, I reverted back into my comfort zone and tried observing what the figure looks like if it was a bipedal creature. With how hollow and skinny the build was, it looked incredibly goofy. So I took to revamping the entire figure, mostly by adding some much needed silver parts to counteract the overabundance of dark green, like utilizing another Star Wars torso piece, adding CCBS arm connector joints to add more armor and color breakup, and using newer shoulder pieces with the leg builds to lock the knees backwards. Gotta say, I'm much more pleased with this final result. The color scheme is way more balanced. He's able to get into unique and creative poses, and the figure looks way more proportionate with his spindly arms and legs but well-armored torso. And the circular armor pieces surprisingly carries over well with the torso piece, giving the illusion being the sleeves of the armor. The hind leg design combined with simply using the silver CCBS foot piece reminds me of Savior Renegade Angel, because everything always has to be a reference to something, it seems.
And as my old friend Confucius say, the hunter has become the hunter-ed.
So, I characterize this mock as a pretentious but airheaded shaman named Ulcras, and adding the orange brain piece as a sort of red hair instead of a green one personally felt like the icing on the cake for me, as it gave a pleasant contrast that molded well to the rest of the design. In terms of the overall build of the figure itself, Ulcras is probably by far my favorite mock I've made in this video. You know, as I'm walking back from one of my photo shoots, I just realized that the torso actually has battle damage on it, which, I gotta say, it's a very, very sick detail. Although I cannot really tell whether it's, you know, the actual molding of the torso, or whether it's just been paired around roughly. I think it's the molding of the torso, because it does feel reminiscent of some Transformers Siege figures, because I have like 2 of them, and it is a bit similar to that. But yeah, just a cool little detail I noticed. So maybe our little ogre shaman friend has been through a lot more than we care to think, I suppose. With my prior 2 mocks having a medieval and spiritual theme respectively, I knew that for my next build, I had to create a character with a more futuristic look while relying on a color scheme that had less of a reliance on silver pieces. However, because I already owned Vortex and Spider Monkey, there were plenty of purple and blue pieces at my disposal. There were also 2 lightsaber pieces from the Star Wars sets which I knew would bolster the futuristic look. So at first I attempted to make a laser cutter weapon, but then I began forming a backpack with a blue Toamato torso piece as the main component, and with all the specialized pins and sockets available, I knew that this was where most of the build was going to go. So I did plenty of experimenting, adding some Star Wars gun pieces along with Voltix's lightning pieces. Anything to make it look like advanced technology. It was a long process trying to make this backpack work with the design without clashing with any potential posability the figure may have. After plenty of tinkering with the backpack, the cyborg scavenger named Kibble was born. I named her Kibble as a reference to a piece of Transformers toy design terminology, with how Transformers tend to have components of a vehicle mode sticking out in robot mode, more often than not, ending up as a backpack for figures, which really summarizes the development of this particular mock. As a result, the core figure is very compromised and basic, with a simple construction system of about 10 legs and only her 4 arms getting extra armor, though this was done to maximize posability, and I still love some of the extra features I added, like the use of Jay's Electromech's hand as a mechanical hand, and a piece from Swampfire to act as a small tie, along with the figure using a Bulwark Eye Stalk piece as a flip-down visor. The backpack, however, is really what gives Kibble her most notable features. The spear can be detached and held with a cybernetic hand, and the use of Voltix's lightning pieces give it the impression that the backpack can also double as a jetpack. Better yet, the cannons can fold forward to become shoulder turrets, thanks to a loose connection utilized for the cannons, which allow it to be locked into place if the spear is reattached into the backpack. This is a gimmick I'm very proud of. Also, yes, in case you are wondering, the entire backpack can also be used as a giant laser rifle thanks to a pin that allows Kibble to hold it in her right hand. Kibble is a mock that is more characterized by gimmicks than the overall build, but I think she manages to succeed in conveying a futuristic theme while applying a more vibrant color scheme. Man, the future rocks. So, after all this time, rebuilding figures and creating new ones from my own imagination, we go back to the question I opened this very video with. Did I get my money's worth? Even though most of the figures I rebuilt were clone sets, I was still pleasantly surprised with the figures I did find, and it was awesome managing to acquire all of them for a cheap price of £5, rather than just paying less than £10 just to get one on eBay. But I think its value as a parts pack cannot be understated. Using only pieces from a bulk lot was a fun challenge to try and find unique ways to build a Moc and learning new techniques along the way to improve my builds. So I guess in short, my answer to that question is hell yeah. Sadly, this is where I end the video. So if you love Lego Constraction, tell me what your favorite figure in the video is in the comments below. I'm open to any opinions. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.